The story begins as Ranger Gary Mills waits inside a clinic. He walks the corridor looking for the surgeon. A surgeon named Sandra takes charge of the wounded patient. The young man in the sling is Gary's son, David. Sandra loses patience and hands him back to Gary. 6 people are dead out at Cap's Crossing. She was the only person still alive. Her neck opened. The wounded woman is rushed straight to the operating room. David wakes and learns one of his victims survived. Gary snarls that he should have left him to die. In surgery, she finds the carotid nicked and nerves damaged. The woman's blood pressure drops on the table. Her heartbeat holds on the monitor as they close. The only witness to the massacre is still alive. The wound will probably cost the woman her voice. It took him 2 years to kill again. She reminds Gary that David is his son, not hers. She wants the boy locked away for good. David's own mother killed herself years before any of this. She cannot keep doing this for them anymore. The question of how many more bodies goes unanswered. While they argue, David walks into the woman's room. He looks under her dressing and calls it nasty business. He leans close and tells her he missed her. He greets her warmly, like an old acquaintance he missed. Her monitor flatlines while the corridor stays empty. Sandra pumps her chest and cannot bring her back. The only witness to the massacre is gone. Amber is going camping for her birthday. Sydney has sliced her finger open while cutting chicken. The boyfriends want to come along on the trip. A couple lingers over a last goodbye. She rules it a girls' trip with no room for men. In the driveway, the couples draw out their goodbyes. One of the boyfriends watches them pull away. At the campground, they start choosing where to pitch tents. Something heavy thuds against the wall of the bathroom block. Amber is asked whether she was near the bathrooms. Amber blames a pine cone and waves it off. Amber refuses because she wants the lake in view. She offers Sydney a spare tent to sleep in instead. Her foster parents always made her sleep alone. The other tent has no room for her either. Amber insists nobody will creep into her tent. Amber finally admits there is a man she talks to. She insists they are only friends. Amber quietly corrects Becca about Josh. A truck rolls into the campsite through the trees. Amber looks up at the young man wearing a badge. He calls himself David Mills, a ranger for this area. Sydney watches the ranger from her camp chair. Sydney hears that animals are the least of their worries. He wants to know whether anyone else is coming. Sydney wants it open, in case they need to leave. The gate is left unlocked at their request. Amber keeps him back with a few more questions. Amber has already researched this place thoroughly herself. David has come straight from Tracy's roadside memorial. Gary wants no more trouble around the house. He sends his son to split firewood instead. Then an older ranger in a tan uniform walks in. Amber greets him from her camp chair. Gary hears that another ranger already came by. David's name stops Gary where he stands. Sandra waits on a bench for Gary to arrive. David has been spending hours at that memorial. Sandra wants to know whether bodies have surfaced. Sandra wants David finally told the whole truth. For Gary, his son will never stop killing. Only one road keeps them out of prison. Sandra reminds him she became a doctor to save lives. She insists they simply talk to him first. Sydney's terror of vomiting comes out at the fire. Sydney's father dragged the man out and called a ranger. At the ranger house, Sandra lingers over an old photograph. She calls it the time before everything went wrong. They can never escape what they have already done. Sandra turns as David walks in behind her. Gary demands to know where he has been. David is pressed hard about visiting the campground. David denies it, and Gary calls it bullshit. David is challenged over taking his father's uniform. The badge the campers trusted was stolen from his father. Sandra sits him down to hear them out. David blames them both for forcing that breakup. David is told they all played their parts. Tracy could never have been his girlfriend. Sandra finally puts the truth into plain words. Tracy was Sandra and Gary's daughter all along. For David, an apology is nowhere near enough. He accuses the pair of ruining everyone's lives. In his view, they should be dead instead. Sandra reminds him of their conversation at the hospital. David answers that his own knife is bigger. He adds that he knows exactly where to cut. Her marathon is a month away, 12 miles daily. Becca wonders aloud what Amber is reading there. It is a criminology text full of serial killers. Amber finds the reasons behind killing fascinating. Sydney wonders why she abandoned nursing for criminology. Amber corrects them, counting 8 separate foster homes. She argues that killers are created, never born. Becca takes in the idea of an untreated wound. Becca dares Amber to profile the group. Amber calls the whole idea a bad one. She quietly admits that she notices things about people. Amber is pushed to start the profiling with Becca. Becca hears herself called aggressive and controlling. She traces all of it to Becca's father leaving. Becca only wants relationships she can control. Amber holds her gaze as Becca laughs it off. Sydney pushes Amber to take a turn on her. Amber calls this the opposite of friendship. Becca calls that answer hypocritical and selfish. Amber sits still as the game turns on her. She hears herself called strong, confident, and driven. Sydney says she drags people along and calls it good. Amber's parents died in a home invasion. The murder classes are how Amber copes. Amber absorbs the whole thing, then heads for bed. Amber stands as someone arrives at the camp. Amber thanks the older ranger for checking on them. The others agree. He seemed to be searching for something. Someone remembers the birthday cake nobody brought. Later that night, Sydney wakes to a sound outside. A tent zipper opens in the dark. It is only Todd, doubled over on the ground. Amber lowers the baton. The boyfriends have driven up. Josh jokes that they have just met Lucille. Sydney is furious and unsurprised at once. One night has been more than enough for Sydney. The women learn the men are staying after all. Amber and Sydney are told about the planned drive. Todd and Becca get ready to head out. Amber signals that she is heading out to run. Amber settles in with her book at camp. Todd drives them deeper along the forest road. The couple settle on a spot deep in the woods. Brush crackles somewhere in the trees behind them. Todd and Becca are alone together in the woods. A hooded figure stands watching from the trees. David holds Todd down and cuts his throat. David rises from the body with the bloodied knife. She screams when she sees who it actually is. Todd is not available right now, David tells her. He cuts her, and she keeps calling for Todd. He wanted to try being Todd for a while. He cuts her again, and she stops screaming. David turns to someone standing nearby in the trees. Amber steps out and complains that he started without her. Amber walks back toward the campground alone. Josh realizes he has no protection with him. He breaks off and goes looking for one. She points out he drove here without one. Sydney is the one who is always prepared. Sydney hands one over and he runs back. Sydney has had enough and wants out. At the ruined bridge, Amber recalls meeting David a year ago. The road to the memorial crosses a ruined bridge. They pass a bridge, a fallen tree destroyed. The drop below the broken bridge is a long one. The two of them cross the ruined bridge together. Sydney's cut finger has turned badly infected. Nobody has come back to the campsite yet. They agree Becca absolutely would leave without them. Sydney wonders aloud where everyone has gone. Hannah suggests taking Amber's car to look for them. Hannah and Sydney settle in to wait a little longer. In his account, she fell while running. Her father died right beside her on the rocks. David tips his head back and goes somewhere else. A man on the shore struggles to get free. The man is left lying alone at the waterline. Sydney holds up the car keys she has found. Sydney is done waiting and heads for the car. Her ashes were scattered across the rocks nearby. Nobody has ever had Amber's back. Amber quietly asks him for his help. Her phone alerts her that the car is moving. David offers to drive her straight there. Amber sends him after the car and returns alone. Amber runs while shouting voices replay Tracy's last argument. The shouting stops, and Amber keeps running. David is left calling Tracy's name into the dark. David stands alone on the empty fire road. The car crawls along the dark forest road. The engine dies, leaving Sydney staring into the dark. A light moves through the trees nearby. Hannah regrets ever leaving the campsite that morning. Sydney refuses to walk back in the dark. She feels safer locked inside the car. They agree to sleep there until morning. Josh eats while they settle in for the night. Josh steps out of the car to urinate. Josh is ordered out of the car for missing. Josh climbs back in beside Hannah. Out in the trees, a figure crouches low. Sydney waits in the car for him to return. Hannah starts looking for something to defend them. Sydney digs through Amber's things in the dark. A torch comes on inside the car. Sydney's face changes at what she is reading. The notebook is full of murder clippings. One reads murder and suicide, the child sent to foster care. A body hits the car and Sydney screams. Hands scramble for the ignition in the dark. Hannah wants to reach the ranger station. Inside the car, they recognize the ranger who visited. Inside the car, they hear him answer back. There is no signal, and Sydney knows it. The two women press together in the dark. In memory, a woman is pinned to the floor. The memory ends in darkness and 2 shots. They wait in the dark for first light. Sydney curses Amber for ever bringing them out here. Somewhere out in the trees, someone starts whistling. On the count of 3, both women run. Sydney is still in the car, ready to run. David carries one of them off through the trees. One of them reaches a parked car alone. Someone runs down the road with a pursuer behind. Hannah runs the open road toward help. Amber refuses her and turns her away. She takes the weapon out of Hannah's hands. Hannah is terrified of ever offending anyone. Hannah never once stands up to Becca. She mocks Hannah for enduring Sydney's complaining. The endless fence riding must completely exhaust her. Amber will not hear that Hannah defends her. Hannah breaks down as the words land. Hannah hears that she has no backbone. She trusted Hannah more than Hannah trusted her. She brings up the exam Hannah failed and hid. For Amber, what is done is done. Amber answers more than you could know. Amber steps in close and Hannah stops speaking. Sydney hides against a tree as David calls her name. Sydney presses herself against a tree, listening. Sydney ambushes him, and the two of them struggle. A blade comes around the trunk toward her. A ranger truck moves along the morning road. He wants her back at the station. Gary does not like the answer he gets. Gary calls what she is carrying illegal. Gary watches Amber from behind the wheel. Amber lets the question sit for a moment. Amber is asked about shooting a man last year. Gary watches her in the rear-view mirror. Gary hears a question about the girl who died. Gary hears that she worked at that hospital. Amber looks out at the road going by. Amber listens to the count of the dead. A young woman in scrubs waits at a door. This is the hospital where Amber once worked. A range extender sits on the dashboard. Gary drops Amber back at the campground. Amber thanks him and watches him go. Amber pulls open the wrecked tent. Sydney is alive, and she is screaming. Sydney climbs out and starts shouting. Sydney finds one of them laid out in the truck. Amber is confronted with the book she kept. Sydney calls them guinea pigs in a death game. She demands to know what Amber has done. Without Amber, they would have noticed nothing at all. She hands Sydney a knife and an umbrella. Amber turns at something behind them. Amber grabs her instead of helping. Sydney fights, and Amber does not let go. She will not let Sydney suffer any longer. David crouches beside her when it is done. David agrees that Sydney was deeply annoying. Gary's swearing carries across Hannah's body in the dirt. David wipes the blade clean. Hannah lies where the baton left her. David walks up to Amber in the trees. Amber waits for him with her back turned. David is standing right there beside her. She is hurt badly and needs a doctor. Amber holds her bleeding side as Gary's voice accuses David. Amber keeps talking into the radio. Blood spreads under her hand. David takes the radio back from her. David listens to what comes back. Amber and David size each other up. Sandra drives out to find them. Her face is set as she drives. Gary drives the same road toward them. Gary grips the wheel and says nothing. Headlights swing across the clearing. Gary steps out into the headlights. Sandra comes forward beside him. David holds Amber with the knife at her throat. Blood is already down her side. Sandra admits she let Steve die by the water. David keeps her in front of him. Gary moves closer, out of patience. Gary stands his ground in the headlights. By the lake, a man kneels over another. Steve lies on the sand where he was left. He is still breathing when she finds him. Gary demands an answer from his son. A shot cracks, and David does not flinch. David calls the shooting unexpected. Sandra levels the gun at him. Gary is down, and David names the memorial. The wound is not deep, and pressure will hold it. Sandra shouts after them into the dark. Amber is bundled into the car. The two of them drive out together. Sandra looks down over the edge. Amber turns away from the edge. Amber's face gives nothing away. David notes that Sandra fell where Tracy died. David is still talking about the sound. He admits he pushed Tracy himself. Amber hears that Tracy never simply fell. David says everyone carries their secrets. Amber lets the silence sit. For Amber, true friends help each other. David waits for the rest of it. Amber says, "Friends tell each other the truth." Amber reminds him he got her shot. She calls the wound part of the act. Amber laughs at something between them. She shows him the clip she removed. David takes the gun and points it. Amber lets him hold it to her. David calls it lucky the gun was empty. He pretends he knew all along. Amber asks whether he is good at maths. She was counting the rounds the whole time. 9 were spent before that empty click. A friendship can quietly outlive its usefulness. David answers that they are friends. David's face changes as she moves. Amber holds his gaze without blinking. The knife is back in his chest. She holds him up and thanks him. She thanks him for being a good friend. Finally, her voice carries through the dark trees, begging for help. She blames the ranger and his son for every death.